weather's cooling, and the season is heating up. This is the Pick Six Podcast. I'm Evan Bland with Sam McKewon, Tom Shatel. We're off of a bye week, guys. We're back. Before we get into this week's stuff, though, I'm curious. You guys went to Indiana. It's been 8 years since Nebraska's been to Bloomington, Indiana. Mm-hmm. What's the scouting report on the place? I've heard something about tall press box steps and a field that's maybe a little unique. What do you guys remember? 8 years since Nebraska's been there.
There's not much to remember. It was good media parking. It was right out front, or just off to the side a little bit. Not a lot of atmosphere, not a lot of tailgating. It's an old Big 8 stadium with an old Big 8 press box. It's probably the smallest press box in the league. It's Nebraska blew a big lead and had to have a kind of a crazy play at the end on a long touchdown pass to win. But it's also hard to get to if you're flying into like Indy. It's like an hour south, and it's a 2-lane highway that always has construction. So I remember we got lost going down there. We got off the beaten path and ended up in rural Indiana, going through these small towns, which was kind of fun.
Oh, that'll happen.
I don't remember that. That's all I remember.
Yeah, we did. It was like a scene out of Hoosiers. They do have a high step inside their press box, Evan, and you will get to experience that. It's like 3 steps in one.
Okay.
I'm not sure why, but they do, and it's like this tall for the people watching on the camera. I don't really understand it. It almost got me going down. Up, I mean, it's pretty obvious, but going down once, it almost got me. And then they have these high walls that separate the bleachers from the field. So you know how like you can go to a lot of stadiums and like Colorado's like this, where you're basically, you could like step over a railing and you're on the field. At Indiana, a lot of it has these really high walls that are like 12 feet up, so you can't go over or you'll get hurt. And so Nebraska's ramp is right there, and so instead of like, you know, having the fans, they're looking down at them. And Bo went there, and I can't remember exactly what happened, but it looked like Bo was doing this, and he was kind of waving at people, and so there was a little controversy after the game about whether he was mad. What I remember most about that Indiana game is Nebraska was still undefeated, and that morning, ESPN Game Day had a segment on Nebraska, and Kirk Herbstreit and Desmond Howard were not buying.
They were laughing at him.
They were laughing at him, and Nebraska's players watched that in the hotel, and the game was at 2:30, and so they saw it, and they were pretty motivated by it. I do believe that was the second to last game in that undefeated streak. They went on to beat Purdue, and then, of course, they lost to Wisconsin. So it was memorable for that reason. This game is going to be memorable for a completely different reason, and that nobody would have predicted that Indiana would be 6-0 and number 16 in the country when Nebraska went there. No one would have predicted Nebraska would be an underdog, but both of those things are true. And Nebraska is actually going to a game that they're not expected to win, and they have an incredible opportunity. You know, ESPN this morning, they have their playoff predictor, which I think they updated this morning. Indiana has a 47% chance of making the playoff.
Wow.
Which is, you know, like something. Right now, Notre Dame and Indiana are sort of the teams battling for that final spot. That's pretty amazing to me. And so Nebraska is going into a completely different situation than I think most people expected before the year.
Well, yeah, and you look at Indiana's – everyone talks about the schedule that Indiana's had to this point, but, like, this is a huge game for them too. I mean, Washington comes in. They go to Michigan State. There's the big two-step with Michigan and Ohio State, and then they end the year at Purdue. I mean, that's a team that could win 10 games and be in that conversation. This is a massive game for the Hoosiers as much as it is for Nebraska. So, like, let's talk maybe a little bit about just kind of the game itself. Like, when we were talking Rutgers 2 weeks ago, it was about kind of winning the clock battle and a defensive slog. Is this a game that Nebraska wants to get into a shootout with Indiana? Or do they want to keep the ball away from that offense, control the clock, kind of do what they do. What's kind of the path that you guys see for Nebraska contending in this one?
Yeah, I think they'd rather slow it down a little bit. I think Indiana, is very good at scoring a lot of points. I think that suits Nebraska as well. But you really don't want to get into a shootout with somebody that's their strength and they're at home. I'd rather take that strength away, and especially on the road, and try to dictate the game that way. So, I think offensive line, running the ball, eating the clock. I think the winner's going to have to score at least 28 points in this one, and maybe over 30. That's just how I see it going. But I think, if you ask me what Nebraska's best path is definitely keeping Indiana off the field. I think scoring first. If you get a very interesting question. If you win the toss, I think you take the ball and you try to go score, because I don't believe that they've trailed this year, have they?
No, they have not.
So, they'll be hyped up. If they fall behind, they'll be going, okay, now what? They'll really pop the balloon. So, I think that would serve Nebraska well, but you have to score on that first drive.
Yeah, I'm with Tom. I think there's a middle ground, and that's what I would say. Find the middle ground. You don't want to have – I think it'd be hard for Nebraska to win 42-41 shootout or have to score 40. Simultaneously, I don't think 17 is going to get it done. And so you have to – I think 28's a nice number. Let's say it's 28-24. Well, what's that mean? You had 4 touchdown drives, which means you probably had a nice day on offense. But you also took enough time on the clock where Indiana wasn't getting to run out there over and over. And you're never going to turn down big plays for touchdowns, ever. But I also think it would be good to have a 13-play drive and an 11-play drive, something that takes a little bit of time off the clock, so that Indiana's crowd gets kind of kicked out of the game. Like, you have to find a way to kick the crowd out. And one of the ways that you can do that is by keeping their offense off the field. Indiana doesn't make a ton of splash plays on defense. They've just been effective, in part because they're playing teams that have to throw to get back in the game. And so if Nebraska can control the football game, then Indiana's defense will play differently. Indiana's played some good offenses, but those offenses been put in a position of having to throw all the time. And so Nebraska has to find a way to control it.
Yeah, I think the crowd part is interesting too, because you always want to start fast on the road anyway. But when you think about Indiana's crowd in particular, this is their first big game. Everyone talks about Nebraska fans kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop. Indiana's got to be feeling that a little bit, do they not? This is so far out of their comfort zone that if you fall behind by 7 or 10 early, I think a lot of people in the crowd could kind of start nodding okay, it's the same old Hoosiers.
Right, the crowd could.
Not the team.
No, I think a lot
crowd.
of the players they're not even from there, so they don't know anything about Indiana football, and I think they'll respond accordingly. That's the great thing of the transfer era. It's just, you can bring in guys that don't have any negative experiences. Trey Palmer, for example, at Nebraska, he didn't know anything except playing at LSU, and he came in, woke up pissed off, and dominated. Yeah. Nothing really stopped him from being a good player, and so I think what Indiana did, their coach did, is he brought in transfers from all over the place, 35 transfers. Those guys don't know anything other than Indiana football is where I'm at now. They're paying me to be here. I enjoy being here. I won at James Madison. Now I'm here. So I think their team will respond well. I do agree, though. The crowd will check out.
Yeah.
Indiana football is not unlike Nebraska basketball. In that way, and we've all been to 100 Nebraska basketball games where once the other team gets up 11, the crowd gets a little whatever. Oh, here we go again. But on the flip side of the coin, everybody remembers Nebraska basketball blowing Indiana basketball out at the Big Ten tournament last year. Indiana football can do that to Nebraska on Saturday if Nebraska's not careful. They have to play really, really well. I think they're ready to play well, but they have to.
It is an interesting difference in how they've built their programs, isn't it? Matt Rule kind of spoke to this in recent weeks about this idea that the reason he didn't go all in on the portal is he didn't want to run guys off, and he kept a lot of Scott Frost's recruits, and I think it's turned out generally pretty well. But Curt Cignetti's gone the other route. He brought in a bunch of guys from James Madison. To your point, Sam, transfers from all over the country who didn't know kind of what they were doing. And I don't know. Do you think, and you kind of called it, I think, Sam, you've used the term microwave kind of approach to it when you talk about a quick addition. Like, is this the high point for Indiana, and it gets harder to sustain that in future years, whereas Nebraska's maybe building more internally towards something? Do you guys buy that notion that maybe Indiana's going to have a harder time sustaining what it's done?
Well, we've been through this a lot. I mean, it's basically Colorado. The same thing as Colorado, but he's not catching near the crap for it. Deion Sanders did. I'm not sure why that is. It's the same thing. Their schedule has been very favorable for this, and they took advantage of it. And this guy's a hell of a coach. He's been through a lot. I mean, he started in the early 80s. I mean, he's been around a lot of football, a lot of great programs. So, this is, Rule said this stuff spring of the first spring. And as he got into trouble with Deion for saying, that's not how I would do it. I want to keep the players we have here. So, he got asked about it again. That's fine, but this is it's nothing new. But then there's no right or wrong here. It's just a different approach. Apples and oranges. Which would you rather do? Well, Cignetti said, I'm going to bring all these guys in. I love the guys I had, and this is how we're going to do it. And it'll be quick, and then you get it. But if you bring that many transfers in, then it's hard to get off the whatever that is, the treadmill or the whatever the hell it is. Yeah, you can't get off it. So in the old days, it was junior college. If you built your program around junior college guys, you didn't develop anybody. You just had to go get more junior college guys. Right. And this is the same thing with transfers. So, how long will he be in Indiana? I mean, he's around my age, so he's an old guy. So how much longer is he going to coach? Is he trying to, win here and then go somewhere else? I don't know. Not many people wanted to spend the rest of their life coaching Indiana football or Nebraska basketball, for that matter. But they're always usually on the way to somewhere else. Whereas Nebraska basketball, they're usually on their way to getting fired.
The wrong way.
But but yeah, there's no right or wrong here. And Matt Rule's way is perfect. But also he was out of college football. He didn't have anybody to bring with him. So, but that's his way anyway. So, yeah, I've heard people say, well, Nebraska fans, well, how come Indiana, it was 6-0 in the guy's first year, and Nebraska couldn't do that, last year. Well, it was just a different approach. So, I think this is the best way for Nebraska football. The way Rule's doing it is the best way. But Indiana, it's the best way for them.
I agree. I think both things can be true at once. I think at Indiana, you can't afford to take 4 years to build the program because they have no history, and that coach is not going to be there for 20 years. And so they actually had to do, I think, the quick fix. It's been really smartly done. They went and got a quarterback who was maybe a little under the radar, but was very good in the MAC, and Curtis Rourke. I didn't ask Rule on Monday. I should have, whether Nebraska kind of kicked the tires on him or not. Obviously, they wanted Kyle McCord until Dylan Raiola changed his mind and flipped to Nebraska. But did they kick the tires on Rourke at all? I mean, they would have known about him through Frank Solich, right? So I was curious. I didn't ask him that question. And I think Nebraska's doing it the way that Nebraska feels like it has to do it, which is sustaining classes and developing players as you go along. I think the goal at Nebraska is that the teams that Matt Rule wants to be like are Georgia and Alabama, right? Mm-hmm. You have to get your roster has to be really full of elite players by the time they get to their junior years. That's the key. Like, if you want to be Alabama and Georgia, the players there are, NFL caliber players by their third year. And I think that's where Rule wants to get Nebraska eventually, is that by your third or fourth year, you're not just a guy that's kind of, maybe he's going to develop into a good player. He's a really good player by the time that he has reached his maturity. So I think Nebraska's doing it the way it had to do it. Indiana's doing it the same way. It's legitimate, though, that I understand Nebraska fans being like, when does Nebraska get to be the flavor of the week? And you could say, well, it was 3 weeks ago when they lost Illinois. They shouldn't have lost that game. But, it's a legitimate comment. When. So now it's Indiana. 5 years ago it was Minnesota. A couple years ago it was Northwestern. And Brett Bielema had a team. I understand Nebraska fans wanting to be that team. And I understand that Saturday's game is an opportunity to beat Indiana and maybe, strike one back for Nebraska. Nebraska fans will be frustrated if they lose to Indiana. If they beat Indiana and then they go to lose to Ohio State by 14, Nebraska fans will be like, well, so it goes. But beating Indiana is, I think, part of how you grow as a program. And I'm just speaking for the fans here. I think the fans feel like, yeah, beat that team, gosh darn it. That's the team that you need to beat. So we'll see what happens. Indiana's awfully good.
They were the flavor of the week after they beat Colorado. I mean, Kirk Herbstreit saying they're going to go 7-0. Everybody loved them. And but that changes every week. I mean, it's like the Heisman poll. Every week is some other, this guy, that guy. Every week is something different. So, and Indiana has to play Michigan next week at home. So they'll be all hyped. If they win this one, they'll be all hyped for that, and they'll be the flavor again.
Man, what a schedule they got.
But, yeah, it's
lines up.
UCLA and Northwestern on the road.
They don't have Nebraska's schedule. Nebraska's second half schedule is tough. And, Indiana, they're predicted to go to the playoff probably because of that schedule.
Yeah, they could.
UCLA, the Minnesota-UCLA game, there was more Minnesota fans there. There was 20,000 Minnesota fans. Imagine Nebraska going out there and playing. There would have been 30,000. It would have been a home game.
Well, next year. And we'll see about this year's USC game.
That'll be fun.
I keep coming back to this idea. You talk about flavor of the week. To me, it's where's that moment in Nebraska football recently where fans are just where were you when this thing happened? They don't have a ranked win in 8 years. They haven't had the bowl trip. What's been their best win in this drought? Keeping Iowa from going to the Big Ten title game in 22, maybe beating Colorado this year.
Drought.
Yeah, in the last 7 years. Probably stopping Iowa in 22, Colorado this year, and that was fine. But
I'd say zero.
Yeah,
I'd say none of them.
There's just that's what it comes back to for me. Is where's the core memory? If you're a fan, if you're coming up and you're watching them, where's the reward? And it hasn't been there. And this feels like it could be one of those reward type of games. And it's Indiana, and they don't have the history, and it wouldn't be like beating Ohio State. But gosh darn it, they could celebrate a bowl and coming back into the top 25 in a big road game.
I love this image of the Shawshank Redemption, where the guy, what's his name?
Andy Dufresne.
Andy Dufresne is in the rain and holding his arms up I finally made it. I can't remember the Husker writer who came up with that. It was a great. I think his name is Dave. I came up with that one before the season. When is that moment going to be for Nebraska where they're standing in the rain, holding their arms out? Will it be Colorado? And I think it's a game like USC. It's not this week. It's not this week. Certainly a win would be very good, and people would be very excited. But it's not like you're not going to arrive this week. I think it's I think it's a USC or a Wisconsin. Something like that. But, that said, they'll be very excited to win. It'll feel like Nebraska's onto something if they win this week. Okay, now we got something. They clinch a bowl if they win Saturday. That won't even be the headline, but it could be. But it probably won't be because everybody will be looking ahead to, now we can win this one. Now we can win that one. So, but Yeah, when's that moment gonna? But it has not happened in the last 7 or 8. There hasn't been anything. I would say none of those wins. I don't even remember any of them. To be honest,
Crawling through 7 years of losing schedules and coaching changes just to emerge on the other
Oh,
side.
I knew. Yeah, the crawling part. Just to
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Coming out on top.
I like it.
What about the other, I guess, side of it for Nebraska? We talked about kind of the shootout aspect. Like, is this the game where, like, the defense makes Indiana's offense look normal? Or do you think what Indiana's done in terms of moving the ball around, depth of playmakers, makes that more of a challenge for what Nebraska is going to have to defend?
I think that, again, the middle ground may be where it ends up. I think Indiana's going to make some plays, and I think Nebraska's going to make some stops. And, so I think there's a chance that Indiana doesn't go for 515 yards and 47 points. I think Indiana could score 28, or they could score 24, and they could gain 350 yards. But that'd still be a good day against Nebraska's defense, which has not given up many games like that since Matt Rule got here. So what's Nebraska's definition of a good day on defense? It wouldn't be giving up 24 points and 350 yards. If they won 28-24, it might be, but that's not what they're looking for. I mean, Nebraska's defense is, let's give up 10, and let's give up 280, somewhere in there. I do think Nebraska's defense matches up in some ways well with Indiana. I do. I think if they can slow down Indiana's run game, I think Nebraska's secondary can generally cover what Indiana's trying to do. So that's where I think that's a key. I'm still working through the 2-minute drill. Part of me says Indiana's going to score some points, and Nebraska's offense needs to be able to match it. And I still think Nebraska's offense needs to come a ways based on what we saw in the first half. They did some really nice things in the first half of the season, but they have more to get, and I think Matt Rule has talked about that.
Yeah, we talked about the running aspect of it. You guys buying special teams as more of an asset this week? Or do you have to see it?
no, absolutely not. I mean, why would it be an asset? I mean, I got to see it first.
Yeah.
I mean, what's different? Is Ovano going to kick? Is he the guy? Is he back? Is he healthy? Is he going to make him? I mean,
Put it this way: how would you manage the special? If you're the coach right now, are you kicking at all? Are you just going for it on fourth down? What how are you navigating sort of that uncertainty in that unit?
well, I look at the win first, and I just look at. And then they say, well, they're doing all this stuff right in practice, and they can't do it in the games. Well, that doesn't do anybody any good. So. How am I managing it? I've got my fingers crossed. I'm saying a prayer. I don't know. But you can't go for it at like midfield. You're at your own 40, or you're at Indiana's 40. We're not going to kick a field goal, so it's like 4th and 2. We're going to go for it. If you don't make it, Indiana scores in like 3 plays. I mean, they'll have all the momentum. The crowd will be up. I think you have to be very careful. I said this in the last game. I'd punt and try to pin them down and make them go 90 or 85 or whatever. I would not go for 4th and whatever around midfield and give them half the field, especially that offense at home. I wouldn't do it. It's just a game of – this game is going to be decided by a few plays and a lot of momentum stuff. And if you're out there rambling and gambling, you better be right.
Did you catch Matt Rule, though, last week? He said maybe he wants to be a little bit more aggressive in special teams. I wonder if that means they got a little bit of a sweet tooth for the fakes and it just being a little gimmicky in the absence of having some – sustainable performances.
Yeah, but you better be right there too. You remember a guy who went to Ireland and decided he was going to onside kick, right? If you're going to do a fake punt,
what happened there? Yeah.
Well, you do one of those fake punts and for some reason it didn't work. Indiana takes over. Bam, bam, bam. I mean, now Nebraska has a defense that can kind of back you up on that a little bit. They don't. It's a very, very good defense. It's not going to give up a lot of easy stuff. But this game is going to be turned by momentum plays and one or two things. This goes right, this goes wrong, turnovers. So I'd be careful when we're getting aggressive. Nebraska fans, they see you lost a game because you tried a fake punt, didn't work. I remember a game in Cotton Bowl where that happened. And that did not go over very well against Auburn. They'll be all over Rule if and he probably doesn't care, but I'm just saying this is a game where I wouldn't go crazy because Indiana's at home and they're feeling very confident right now. You know, the dangerous team is very confident that maybe doesn't know it isn't that good, but they feel like they're really good. You give them any hope, I mean, that's not what you want.
Yeah, I don't know what's going to happen with special teams. It's an ongoing saga. On offense, I think they've got to find a way to run the football against Indiana consistently. Whether that looks like big runs or not, I don't know. But Dylan Raiola's got to have a good day throwing the football, and I think you got to hit some of the short stuff, and then you have to be able to get the 6-7 yarders that turn into 15 yarders, and they haven't had a lot of those. I think Raiola's really good at throwing the deep ball and throwing that intermediate crossing route of about 17 to 20 yards. He does a nice job with that. I think they would like to continue to see that short passing game get going. No holding penalties. They're envisioning that as part of their run game. Stretch a team horizontally and then get them going vertically. And I think one of the challenges Nebraska's had is that they just haven't been able to get, defenses to come up consistently so that they can run by them. So Jalen Lloyd has not had a ton of opportunities this year, just a few. And Nayor has not had a lot of opportunities since the first game to get behind somebody. And so I think they want to do that. I think they want to get more consistent there. To me, this is a game where I think Nebraska's defense is going to do some things that Indiana hasn't seen, and they're going to be better than any defense Indiana's faced. The best defense that Indiana's faced so far is UCLA or Northwestern, depending on which, I think it's probably UCLA. Well, that defense gave up 42 to Indiana. I think Nebraska will not do that. I think they'll be much better than UCLA. The question to me is Nebraska's offense ready to roll? And, coin flip. You get it. You win it. Do you take the ball? I'd take the ball.
I think so.
I'd take the ball because I want to get a lead. I do not want to be down 7-0 and screwing around with the middle 8 thing where it's like, well, we're down by 10, but we'll cut it to 7 and then we'll tie it at half. No. I want the lead. I want to get up 7-0 as quickly as I can and put the pressure on Indiana, who has never trailed this season. We'll see what Rule does, though. He is a defer kind of guy, but he's changed that. He's changed that tune a couple times in the last couple weeks. I think it would be good if Nebraska takes the football and scores. Do they feel like they have a drive in them where they can just go do that right away?
And the elements should be pretty good, right?
Yes.
The weather, it should be.
They do have
good
an open end.
offensive
They have a
football.
horseshoe end.
Yeah.
So the wind does affect it maybe a little bit differently if it's blowing through that end. But, it's like a 55,000 person crowd. It's not the loudest crowd you'll ever hear, but juiced up crowds are juiced up crowds. I mean, they'll be excited to start. If you can get a 7-0 lead early and quiet that group down, there you go. Now, maybe you put your defense out there and you think you're going to get a stop. I just don't know if they will.
I'm going to guess a lot of that crowd will be Nebraska people who live south, Kentucky, Tennessee, Ohio, Illinois, that whole area around there. I think they'll all be coming from all areas. There's a chance to see their team play. I that's why this game's sold out. They've had a hard time selling that thing out this year. I guarantee you it sold out in part because of Nebraska fans.
It'll be red, so
And
Indiana
Nebraska
can
fans
claim
could have
that.
bought season tickets before the season when nobody thought the team was going to be this good, and then they sell all their other tickets and make a profit, but they get to go to the Nebraska game.
Now, well, it'll be interesting when some Nebraska fan stands up in the middle of the game and goes, "Go Big Red," and the Indiana fans chant with him because that's their slogan too.
They like to say "Go Big Red."
Indiana is the Big Red. Yeah. So
everyone gets along. This is a friendly game.
This should be Nebraska basketball fans should be going to this game, right? We should all get together and.
Yeah, let's just have this thing in Assembly Hall. I mean, that sounds good to me.
That's a great place. and this football thing isn't anything like that. Indiana basketball arena is unbelievable.
Hey, speaking of basketball, Sam, you want to touch on the women's team? You had a couple thoughts on Nebraska women's basketball?
Yep. So let's just get the poll stuff out of the way. Obviously, Nebraska men's basketball team had a scrimmage on Sunday. I didn't see it. Maybe Tom did, but I did not. the Nebraska women's basketball team is ranked in the preseason AP Top 25, which is actually kind of an accomplishment when you think about it. I think it's kind of impressive because even though they went to the second round last year, I don't know that people are necessarily. I mean, Nebraska was not in the top 5 of the Big Ten coaches selections, which I thought was interesting, and so yeah, I mean Creighton's in there too. I voted both Creighton and Nebraska. I'm the women's basketball voter, and I voted both Creighton and Nebraska in the top 25. I put Creighton ahead, I think, out of deference to the fact that Creighton has been a better team than Nebraska the last couple of years and has beaten Nebraska. But honestly, I think Nebraska's ceiling is higher because Creighton didn't go out and add much. They lost what I consider to be one of their 2 best players, 3 best players, and they did not replace that player with a commensurate player. They replaced it with a Division II player. Nebraska, on the other hand, lost maybe its best player in Jazz Shelley, but consider what it gets back. It gets back Allison Widener. It adds Britt Prince. It adds this kid from small-town Illinois that nobody really knows a lot about, and Amaya Hargrove, and I've heard really good things about her. And then they return most of their other players. I think Nebraska has a chance to be very good this year. Not just good, but very good. But it also depends on how well that backcourt meshes without Jazz. If Widener and Prince and Logan Nisley, who might be injured, comes back and they all sort of mesh together, this could potentially be a team that sum is greater than its parts. And the other piece is that, and I've heard a little bit about what Britt Prince is doing in practice, and we'll just have to see whether the amount of scoring that she's apparently doing in practice translates to the court, because this doesn't sound like a player that's going to come in and score 4 points a game. And most of Nebraska's young guards, just so we're clear for people listening, and I've tracked this over years, and I'm going to write about this, most of Nebraska's young guards have not scored a bunch of points their first year at Nebraska. They just haven't, and that goes back many, many, many years. So if Britt Prince comes in and she's scoring 14 points a game, which would be more than any young guard, I think, in recent history has, including Allison Widener, this could be a good team. You just don't know what impact Britt's going to have right away, and then you don't know how Widener's going to come back. Because if she comes back as the Allison Widener we saw 21 months ago, then again, this is going to be a really good team. There are people who know this team better than I do who disagree, who think, well, you can't replace Jazz Shelley and think you're just going to be fine. My read, and I feel like I've had an accurate read of the program over the last 5 years, is that this team has a potential to win 25 games if those things mesh in the backcourt. I think the Big Ten isn't very strong, and and I think they got to go out and play USC and UCLA, who are top 5 teams, over the holidays out there. And you want to talk about crowds. Nebraska will have more fans at some of those games than USC or UCLA will. They will. And it's the perfect time to go play those teams. They're not in school. The students won't be there. I will not be surprised if Nebraska upsets either UCLA or USC on that road trip. And that may be the catalyst for something special. We'll see.
What's sort of the barometer for that team, Sam? Is it to make the Sweet 16? Is it to be in the top 3 in the Big Ten? Like, is there a certain threshold that they're looking to hit that would consider that season a success?
I think they would say they want to get to the second weekend. Yeah. They've made it to the NCAA tournament. They've won a game under Amy Williams. Now they want to get to the second weekend. Yeah. There are people that are going to say, well, it's too early to do that, and so on and so forth. And I'd be like, my response back would be, well, Alexis Markowski's in her senior year.
Early? What do you mean early?
Well, the sense that, there's just always a sense of pessimism around the program. Like, they can never do what they're fully capable of doing. But I think Markowski's final year is the time to do it.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Is Nebraska women's basketball better in the NIL portal era? Has that opened avenues for them that they didn't have previously?
I think they're building it the way Matt Rule builds his program. Yeah, I don't think they intend on doing a lot of high-ticket transfers. A lot of times in women's basketball, you're not necessarily seeing as many transfers as you do in volleyball, because as we've seen in volleyball, John Cook only plays 8 players, and a lot of times really good players are on the bench. In basketball, they're all going to play. And so I don't think the transfer thing is quite as big of a deal Maryland's doing it. So of all the Big Ten teams, the team you want to watch that's doing transfer heavy is Maryland and USC. But all the gals went to USC to play with Juju Watkins. That's what that is. And then all the gals that went to Maryland are just really good players that transferred in who want to play at Maryland. But if you look at what Caitlin Clark did at Iowa, they weren't taking a bunch of transfers to surround Caitlin Clark with, and South Carolina had virtually none. That was the national champion. UConn doesn't take transfers, so it's just not quite the same thing in women's basketball as it is in men's. Kansas is probably the best team in the country in men's basketball, and most of their team is transfers. The best team in women's basketball is South Carolina, and Dawn Staley's building it through 5 stars. So there you go. Like, that's how women's basketball is.
But some of that's reflective of just the style of play, right? Like the individual talent in men's basketball, generally speaking, tends to rise to the top, where it seems like the women have that too, but like those best teams are just like collective juggernauts when you talk about South Carolina and UConn.
Used to be. Caitlin Clark changed the conversation. She changed it. So because the players around Caitlin, there's one, Kate Martin, who's going to be in the WNBA, and there might be 2 overall. Hannah Stolke might make the WNBA. The rest of those players are going to go on and do other things with their careers. So Caitlin Clark changed that conversation, and now, this thing with Juju Watkins, obviously these players wanting to go and play with her. Some of it was Oregon State and Washington State not being in a league. And so Oregon State had this great team last year. Well, all their players transferred because they didn't want to play in no league. And so one went to Oklahoma, one went to UCLA, one went to USC. So I think what's changing, Evan, in women's basketball is there is now a go find one star. Caitlin Clark got paid. Pay that gal, which is Juju Watkins, and then surround her with players that want to play with her. And those aren't necessarily all stars. LSU did the star thing last year, and it didn't work. Angel Reese and Anissa Morrow and all the, and Haley Van Lith, and, Reese graduated and Van Lith went somewhere else. The whole transfer all-star team thing didn't work.
Interesting.
It works in men's. It does not work as well on the women's side, or it hasn't so far.
Interesting. You want to talk a little baseball? We can do that quick before we get into picks.
Yeah.
I can talk about baseball.
Go ahead, yeah.
Anyone else want to talk about baseball?
I do.
can talk about baseball.
So here's the thing. So they had a 5-game whatever,
Yeah.
and it ends today. The Red-White series. You've taken in some of that, Evan. I think there is a sense of excitement around the program. I do get that sense that fans are excited. People who love Nebraska baseball, they see this as maybe the year where they can build and not just restart.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you think about the 21 team that went to and pushed Arkansas to the brink in that regional. They reset the next year and cratered. They didn't make the Big Ten tournament. Every year it seemed like they would get something going. There was a reset. And this year, the number that they'll throw out is 26. You got 26 newcomers back on a roster that's going to have to get down to 40. You return 70% of your innings and your at-bats this year. So, what I've been watching this fall has been the pitching side is what really interests me. It's the second year with Rob Childress. Tom, you know as well as anyone the impact that he can have on a staff. The lineup is more or less what it was last year. You have a new catcher. You have to replace Josh Caron. Probably Hogan Haligso. The Creighton transfer will be that guy. But I think the way that they score is going to be very similar to last year. They'll be average nationally, maybe slightly above average. A lot of small ball. They're going to steal. They're going to bunt, pressure defenses. They need the clutch hits, just occasional power. So, I think that is a pretty established part of what this team is. What's interesting to me is the pitching side of this. And there's a ton of room for guys to step up. And we've seen guys do that. I mean, they replace Brett Sears, who's gone. He was the Friday guy. I think Mason McConaughey is going to fill that job as the former Saturday guy. And then you just have 7 or 8 guys who could fill the weekend spots, the midweek starting roles. I think Ty Horn is one of those guys. He was a really highly thought of prospect out of Kansas who kind of had his adjustment year as a freshman. He's had a really good offseason. Jalen Worthley, who's going to be a junior, is a guy who's been a reliever. He might be a starter. Drew Christo, Will Walsh is back for a 5th year. Tucker Timmerman's another young guy that they're pretty excited about. So the number of options that they have is really fascinating to me. And so I think a lot of it's going to come down to the midweek, as we've seen, that's been a struggle. And then what does the bullpen look like? They didn't really have that shutdown stopper really they haven't had one since Spencer Schwellenbach a few years ago, and they feel like maybe they have one now in this junior college transfer named Luke Broderick. So it's an interesting group. They don't walk a lot of guys. I think they'd like to bring up their strikeout numbers just a little bit, and maybe they'd trade a few walks to do that. But that's what I'm interested in, is like, how does Childress and these pitchers develop, and that's adding to what already Nebraska has done, which has been a 40-win team that won the Big Ten tournament that's been into the NCAAs.
Nebraska will be the favorite in the Big Ten, correct?
I'm going to put them 1 or 2. I need to do a little more looking at Oregon. They had a really strong offseason. But, yeah, I think in a 17-team baseball league, I'd put them 1 or 2 right now without much hesitation.
I mean, I don't know what Oregon's baseball schedule is, but, I mean, that's going to be hard.
I'm really interested
A lot of travel.
in two things going into this spring, and that's a midweek crisis. You know, can they solve that? I mean, they've had 2 or 3 years now where they had trouble with these teams, and again, it doesn't keep you out of the tournament, but it would just. I think it just they just felt like they're just up and down, and you know, just be consistent and go take care of business during the week. And I don't know if it's they don't get up for those games or other teams get up for them or what, but you know, raise the level and keep it that way all year. And then I'm interested in the Big Ten tournament. Did they start something? Is this going to be a thing now where it's going to be their tournament every year, and you know you're going to have to beat them, and they're going to have the crowd, and they're going to play well every year, and when they get to Omaha, and I mean that would really turn that whole event on. I think if they did a lot of that, they could get to the final every year, or you know win it most years, asking for a lot, but. Something happened last year. There was something, for lack of a better word, magical. You know, last year with that team and the way they won, and they came out of the losers bracket. And I just wondered if there was a spark there that was lit that I can build on.
Yeah, I think their blueprint for building a team in this climate is pretty sustainable. They continue to lean heavy on the JUCO side, and they've had a lot of success there. McConaughey, who's probably going to be their ace, was a junior college player 2 years ago. They've added a number of bats and pitchers from that side as well. I think they've kind of learned to pick their spots in the portal initially. They really went all in on it and got burned, I think, in a few situations. And so you had a guy like Cale Frost, who was the Summit League Player of the Year at South Dakota State as a hitter. You had Hogan Haligso.
Burned Nebraska.
What's that?
Cale Frost. He burned Nebraska.
How do you mean? Well, with South Dakota State, yeah, he did. That was their worst loss of the year last year.
I'm sure they wanted. They wanted him after he banged out like 4 home runs.
Yeah.
But, you know, Evan, talking about how to build the team, don't you think at some point they're going to look at, okay, we're getting the regionals now. How do we get to the second weekend? And do they have to build it a certain way to get to the second weekend?
Yeah, I mean, you've seen as many College World Series games as anyone too, Tom. Like, all the teams there are high-powered offenses for the most part. Mm-hmm. You at worst, you got to be good in 2 or 3 areas, right? You got to be able to be a slugging offense, really lock down pitching staff, and a solid defense. If you can do 2 of those 3, and I think Nebraska could get there with its current offense if those other areas were elite. But that's, you know, Nebraska had the 1 year a couple years ago where Max Anderson and Bryce Matthews and Gabe Swanson hit a bunch of home runs, and Nebraska top 90, which was by far the most in program history. But this is not that team. They're back to playing small ball. And again, I think if the defense takes a big stride, I think the pitching has the potential to be competitive. But yeah, like those teams that get to Omaha, strike out a bunch of guys, hit a bunch of long balls, walk a ton, stress the opposing pitchers and defense. So I think Nebraska's on that path. I don't know that they're there yet. And it'll be interesting to see what the Big Ten does now that they've added those West Coast teams. How much does that help the RPI? How much does that sort of boost the profile of the league from a national perspective?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think the West Coast teams are that good to do that right now. They're you know, USC's not. UCLA has been up and down and not really a World Series type team. Oregon's up. So I don't know. I worry a little bit that being in the Big Ten is going to drag them down a little bit. I mean, I don't know that they're not hitting on all cylinders going into the Big Ten. So it's going to be interesting, right? But I like the identity for Nebraska, and I don't want to talk too much about the Van Horn, but that's where Will Bolt learned, and they had great starting pitching, and they scrapped for everything. They did small ball. They were aggressive on the base paths. They did, they moved guys around, but they were able to hit a home run once in a while too. So you have to be able to do that. But I like the identity for Nebraska. I've always felt like that worked here, and you don't have to pay a big NIL money to get a lot of the great players. You can get there are plenty of the good scrappy kind of guys all over the place. So you can find them and win with them. So, but I think it's the pitching you kind of have to have the studs, but. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like in football. They always said the option offense traveled and was portable into any kind of weather conditions. I think that's the philosophy with Nebraska's offense is like, hey, it's a windy day. It's 35 in the real feel in East Lansing in March. Like, lay down a bunt, stress a pitcher, steal a base, take the extra bag. Like, they feel like that can do it, and maybe it can.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a challenge to win the Big Ten and also be good enough to make the CWS. That's the challenge. You just don't have once you have to go down and play the teams in the South. I mean, Nebraska was, when they played Florida, those were not.
You can't
those
get
were
to
not competitive games.
You can't get to the NCAA tournament unless you win the Big Ten. You have to be good. It's like same with like Big Ten football. It was forever that way. You had to play the way to get to the national championship. You had to win the Big Ten. To win the Big Ten, you had to play their way.
Right. Mm-hmm. That's why Oregon beating Ohio State was not a bad thing. Even though I think Ohio State will beat Oregon when they play again, it's not a bad thing.
I watched the replay of that last night, and I saw the Big Ten Network had the 60-minute game. I watched that, and then I watched the big show later, and they went through that thing, and that whole 12th man thing. I loved it, but it was so funny that during the announcers just kind of nobody glossed over it. But how did Lanning know they were going to call a flag on it? How did he know that they weren't? I mean, that was the whole idea, right? That he wanted.
Well, and that it would take time off the clock.
Right. Yeah.
With the infraction. Well, I guess it's kind of a win-win. If they don't call it, you have the benefit of an extra defender, and if they do call it, then you lose the time.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was a clever move at the end of the game.
Very much so.
Wrapping my head around that was kind of. I was like, why did he do that? Okay.
I'm sure that one of the things, and our former colleague Jimmy Watkins works out there now, and one of the things that I think you're hearing this week is that they don't have the right quarterback. He screwed up this. He screwed up that, and. It's just there's a lot of pressure around that program to win every single game.
He had a great game.
I thought he played great, but he made one,
one
mistake. And that out there, I think that's why Colin McCord left. He's like, I don't want to be in a program where if I make one mistake, I'm a bad player. So, and that's the way Nebraska used to be. I mean, that's what Scott Frost had to deal with. No offense to the fans back then, but Scott took a lot of crap.
Ohio State's come a long way, or maybe. In that they used to be just worried about a Michigan game where John Cooper couldn't beat Michigan, so these guys just can't get it done. And now it's not even about Michigan yet; it's about everything else. They don't want Ryan Day anymore. So I think they're going to beat Michigan, and we'll see. And then they'll probably beat Oregon in the rematch. So, but
will they beat Penn State? There's a question.
Well. Will they beat Nebraska? Yeah, probably. Yeah. Well, we'll get to that next week.
Penn State's willing to basically throw the kitchen sink at everybody. I mean, of the two games, the Penn State-USC game was more fun to watch.
Oh, it was a blast.
Like, it was more
great.
I mean, the Oregon-Ohio State game was a great game.
Yeah.
But the Penn State-USC game was two teams that were doing everything they could do to win. And, I mean, I tip my cap to Penn State. They tried. They knew they had to do everything to win.
Yeah.
Kudos to them.
That was an all-uniform game,
never,
too.
Yeah, James Franklin's never coached like that, so it's pretty cool to watch.
Yeah, maybe they'll win the Big Ten.
They might.
I don't know.
If they play like they did at USC, after the first quarter, they could win it. Let's go to picks. Evan got surged back ahead last week with an 8-4 week. Basically came down to a couple of overtime games. That's what shifted the balance. The Florida-Tennessee game shifted it. And then there was another game that
Penn
shifted.
State USC.
Penn State USC, yeah. So those two games, if those two games had ended up differently, would have different records. But Evan is back ahead by 2 over me, and Tom went 7-5. He got a little robbed. Mississippi was going to win that game. I still don't know how they lost it. And then he had USC as well. So if he had gotten those two, he would be tied for the lead. All right. So anyway, Evan's up 2 on me and 3 on Tom. Miami at Louisville.
I'll take Louisville. They've been down, but I think they get up. No.
Is Miami right for a loss?
Yeah, they've been riding the edge.
I'm still going to go Miami. Mm-hmm. Although, yeah, it feels like they could be due.
I'm going to go Miami. I don't know. UVA at Clemson. UVA's 5-1. So is Clemson.
I think Clemson's found something.
Yeah, Clemson.
Yeah. Clemson as well. I think Clemson is going to be the representative of that league, incidentally.
Yep.
Alabama at Tennessee, the third Saturday in October.
The battle of vulnerable juggernauts.
Man, that's a good game.
Yeah,
I don't. Oh God.
Right? Knockout game.
I'm going to take Alabama because everybody's writing them off. They beat the hell out of Wisconsin. They're still a good team.
Yeah,
they just kind of got off track. I think Tennessee's kind of weird right now, but Alabama's weird. They're both weird. I'll take Bama.
What do you got?
I'll go with the weird tide as well.
Tennessee. All right. Tricky game here. Notre Dame at Georgia Tech. Now, Georgia Tech's won a few this year. They're not bad, and they're playing at home. Notre Dame is 5-1. They have one loss to Northern Illinois.
Irish.
I'll take Notre Dame as well.
Gotta go Dame, yep.
Okay. Could be interesting. That's the Rudy game, by the way. Notre Dame.
That's right.
Georgia Tech.
Was Rudy offsides? That's the debate.
Michigan against Illinois. I'm taking Illinois at home
Ooh.
to beat the Wolverines.
I am too.
I'm going Michigan. You talk about Miami being due. I think Illinois is due.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe.
Michigan coming off a bye week. Did they work on their passing game? I don't know. Louisiana State at Arkansas. LSU at Arkansas. Rivalry game in the middle of the year now. It used to be after Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I picked Arkansas once, and it came through for me. I'm going to go LSU. I'm going to ride that horse again. So,
Going LSU too.
I'm going LSU as well. Wisconsin at Northwestern on the lake.
Yeah, Wisconsin.
Same.
Wisconsin for me as well. South Dakota State, number 1 in FCS, at North Dakota State, number 2 in FCS. We do this game every year. We've been doing it for 5 years. SDSU and NDSU. What do you got? Both teams have players from the state of Nebraska.
I'm going to go with the home team, NDSU.
Yeah, me too.
So am I. Marty Brown is their starting running back. He is a prep grad. Cole Payton is a Westside grad. He's their number 2 quarterback. They use him as a Wildcat. Georgia, Texas.
What time's that game?
It's in the evening.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Texas.
Yeah, Texas.
You think so, huh?
Mm-hmm.
All right. I'll take Texas as well. I think Texas has the best team. But this is that game. Texas loses a game every year, and this could be the one where they pucker. Finally, Nebraska at Indiana. What do you got? Indiana, 6.5-point favorite.
I got Indiana.
Indiana, the first person to pick against Nebraska this year.
Yep.
Tom Shatel.
I'll be the second. I think the Hoosiers find a way to win a close, entertaining one.
I don't trust Nebraska's special team. I think in these games in the second half of the season, special teams is, and I think Indiana at home is, like I said, they don't know how good they are, and I think they're great. So that goes a long way. Nebraska just seems to be every game there's a play where they stub their toe or they get a punt blocked or they do something like I don't trust it yet. So, but they're capable of winning it. But I'm gonna go IU.
Yep.
I'm going to take Nebraska. We need to decide whether our 2-minute drill is going to pick Nebraska or Indiana because that's sort of a group collective vote. But I am going to pick Nebraska in our picks. I think Nebraska's defense matches up pretty well with Indiana. I think Nebraska wins it 27-24. And that's not a Pollyanna pick. I'm not just going that way. I've thought about it. I think Nebraska's matches up well. They don't match up well with Wisconsin later in the year. They match up pretty well, though. We'll see.
It's going to be fun.
It is going to be fun.
Bloomington or bust this weekend.
You guys will be there. I'll be here.
You're the real winner. No, it'll be good.
That's right.
Should be a lot of fun.
No high step.
Go to Nick's.
Got to keep the high knees.
We'll try.
Nick's Pub.
We'll be in Bloomington. What's this place called?
The quintessential Indiana bar.
Okay.
The campus bar. Nick's Pub.
Nick's Pub.
Very good.
97% Indiana basketball memorabilia.
I was there a long time ago. I don't remember what they had on the walls, but they got Hoosier stuff.
Maybe a
on the
chair
walls,
that Bob Knight threw once.
Well, maybe he. I don't think he's ever been there, but if he had, he probably would have tossed the chair out the window. But it's a cool place. I'm going to write about this for Saturday. That Indiana to me is you talk about sister cities around the world. Nebraska and Indiana are kind of kindred spirits to me. They really are. Indiana basketball is Nebraska football. 5 national titles on the wall. The culture of the state, the small town. Hoosiers, Huskers. They were the Huskers in the movie Hoosiers.
That's right.
Just everything. There's a lot going on there. I think it's a fun. I wish that the two played more. I really do.
Well, second half of the season's here. We're excited about it.
Yep.
Big chance for Nebraska. Hope everyone enjoys the game this weekend. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. For Sam and Tom, I'm Evan, the Pick Six Podcast, and the Omaha World-Herald. Thanks.